This was a few years ago. I, 34-year-old female, was out with friends from work. We were saying goodbye to one who was moving away for a new job. It was initially just dinner, but it ended up clubbing. TBH, I'm normally not the most sensible person when out for the night, but as the clubbing wasn't planned, I had driven. So, I wasn't drinking. I was a bit annoyed about being out clubbing as the only one not drinking, but in hindsight, this saved my ass. For clarification, I have always had an eccentric appearance and often color my hair. At the time, my hair was blonde with blue and pink tips, often worn in pigtails. I had a pair of knee-high boots I loved that were one black and the other white. Yes, I bought 2 pairs of boots specifically to wear them this way. I loved when little kids in shops would call me Harley Quinn, and I often dressed towards that. This night, I was in my boots and pigtails, fishnets and shorts, and even a HQ printed tee. I got into dancing and spent a fair bit of time looking after my smashed friends. The drag queens at my local gay bar loved my outfit, and, despite being sober, I was getting hyped and enjoyed myself. I eventually made sure my drunk friends got into rides safely and started walking back to my car, which unfortunately I hadn't put in a parking structure. I was cheap and left it in a side street. I'll never do that again. The streets were brightly lit and fairly populated, but I kept my keys in my fingers, just out of general practice. I had received a wolf whistle or two, and someone calling, "Hey, Harley," but I was kind of used to catching attention from the way I dressed. I just ignored it, wanting to get to my car. "Harley," I heard again, but it was someone else's voice. I didn't look because I didn't want to engage or make an opening for conversation. "Don't ignore us, bitch." That's when I looked across the street and saw that it was 3 men. I just shook my head to show I wasn't interested and kept walking. There were other people in the lit street, so I figured they wouldn't do anything. I was wrong. They crossed the street. "I'm just heading home, guys." "Sorry." I started speeding up. They followed me. "We just want to talk a second. You don't gotta go home yet. We'll take you home, Harley. Come on." My heart was racing at this point. I looked to the small handful of other people in the street. Some were stumbling, shit-faced. Most either ignored or didn't even notice the situation, as people shouting at that hour in that part of the city was common. I didn't care if it looked like I was overreacting. I clutched my keys and ran. I'd hoped they'd realize they were coming across as creeps and just back off. Or maybe they'd just call me a crazy bitch and let it go. They called me a bitch, all right, but my blood ran cold as I heard them chasing me. I'm not a fast runner, and though my boots had wide heels, the heels were very tall, and I kept picturing myself tripping, picturing myself dropping the keys, picturing them catching up. I kept focus, not daring to look back, knowing how clumsy I am and that I couldn't risk it. I rounded the corner. The street was empty, but my car was under a street light. I was holding back tears as I reached the door. I took a deep breath to steady my fingers, adamant not to be that person so close to safety just to screw it up by panicking and dropping my keys. I opened it, got inside, slammed the door, and locked it just in time. One of them tried to open my door. I was trembling and couldn't make out what they were saying as they shouted, kicking my car, cursing at me, calling me Harley. I peeled out of there, almost hitting one of them. After 5 minutes of driving, enough to get a safe distance, I pulled aside, shaking and crying too hard to drive safely. I got a haircut the next day. My HQ phase was over. It took a while to be comfortable dressing in my own style again. This isn't the only time I've been harassed by men, but this was the only time it was a group, and I'd never been chased or had someone show explicitly violent intent like they had that night. If I'd had anything to drink, or let panic cause me to fumble, I don't want to think about what they might have done to me, but sometimes I just can't avoid thinking about it. Around 2 years ago, my friend Jenny decided to throw a party for her birthday. She had not celebrated her birthday in many years and was really excited to do so again. Something important to know about Jenny is that she was in active addiction at this time. It was all kinds of different drugs. I think it mostly depended on whatever she could get at that time. But it was bad. She is a lovely person and doing very well right now, but I do think that her drug use was one of the reasons why this all went so wrong. Her friend circle consisted mostly of people she used with. She had a few good and close friends, but not a lot. A week before the party, I asked her how many people she had invited, and she said around 80. I laughed and asked her why so many. She said, "Well, I also invited people that I don't know really well, but they're chill." This was already kind of a red flag for me. That night I had another party before hers, so I was decently tipsy. I knew that the other party would mostly be people that I did not know on hard drugs, which I had never done and had no experience with at the time, so I needed some liquid courage. I went with my friend Noah. She had rented a small venue to fit all the people. It was a pretty much abandoned lot on a very quiet street. There were almost no houses, only a few factories. The layout is pretty important to know. Basically, you had the entrance with a tiny yard for people to smoke. Then you had to enter the building and go up the stairs to get to a living room/kitchen type area, and next to that was a small room with a DJ. Everything was fine at the beginning. I did have a lot of fun. Around 1 o'clock, there was a small fight. I didn't witness it, but I was told immediately after. Apparently, there were 4 guys who tried to get in, but only one of them was actually invited. They were told to leave by some of the guys, and when they didn't, there was a small fight. Nothing noteworthy, I thought then. I asked Noah if he wanted to go out for a smoke. He said that he'd finish his conversation, and then we could go together. A little while later, we walked out of the kitchen and towards the stairs, but there were like 6 people bundled up at the top of the stairs. Instinctively, I took a step back. I was just turning around to Noah with this, "What the fuck?" Look when we heard people screaming and glass shattering. All the people who were standing in front of us jumped back, and so did we. There was more screaming and people stumbling on the stairs. I then saw Oliver, one of the few people I knew at that party, walking up the stairs, head covered in blood. Another guy I knew by face with a bleeding nose, and my friend Jason grasping his shoulder, his girlfriend behind him. Earlier that evening, I stupidly and drunkenly fell on the cement with both knees, scraping them open. But because of that, I knew where the first aid kit was. I never have any issues with blood. I can't handle other bodily fluids, but when someone is bleeding, I can help them, no problem. I saw Oliver go into the kitchen, and I wanted to go after him to help him. Now, this is about to get kind of gross, but bear with me. I saw Oliver had something stuck in his forehead. Because I heard the glass shattering, I assumed it was glass. But when I got closer, I saw that it was a piece of his skull sticking out of his forehead. That was too much for me. Instantly sober, I promptly turned around and went into another room. He was surrounded by a lot of people though, and 911 was called immediately. Turns out that those guys who were rejected from the party came back with 30 other guys, carrying bats and steel pipes. They just started hitting the first people they saw, and they left as quickly as they came. The whole attack lasted no more than 30 seconds. I found my friend Jason, still grasping his shoulder. He and his girlfriend were closest to the entrance of the property, so they were attacked first. Yes, these cowards did indeed beat up women. They did not care at all. Jason's shoulder was dislocated. Luckily, his girlfriend wasn't too wounded. Police and an ambulance arrived pretty quickly. Oliver was taken to the hospital, and luckily made a full recovery after surgery. My friend Jenny was in hysterics, both because of what happened and because of whatever was in her system. The cops were no help. At one point they yelled at her because she was too upset to form a complete sentence. They left after a while, and so did most of the people. Noah and I were still there. We tried to help wherever we could. I was still in shock and kind of numb. But what snapped me out of my daze was seeing people scrubbing the blood covering the staircase. There was nothing more I could do there, and more importantly, I wanted to go home. Noah went with me, and we stayed up for hours talking and processing everything. To think that, if we had decided to go smoke even a minute sooner, or if Noah wasn't having that one conversation, we would have been in the middle of this all. It would also have been a very real possibility that these guys had guns or knives. We lived in a pretty rough area, which is even more terrifying to think about. Hands down the worst party I've ever been to. This happened around 3 years ago, when I was about 14 years old. My parents had been separated for a long time, and I used to live with my mom during the week and my dad on weekends. My dad always made significantly less money than my mom. He lived alone in a house that was honestly too big for one person, and he struggled a lot with paying rent. Then one day, one of his friends asked if he could move in. His friend, John, needed a place to stay, and my dad needed money. So John offered to pay every week in exchange for one of the spare rooms. My dad agreed, obviously, and John moved in with us. Since I only stayed there on weekends, I didn't see John that much. But whenever I did, I always felt uncomfortable around him. He wasn't really scary or aggressive or anything. Honestly, he was usually nice, but there was just something off about him that I couldn't explain. I don't mean this in a rude way toward people with mental illnesses, but even back then, I could tell something about him wasn't right mentally. At some point, he had taken one of the drawers in our bathroom, and one day, I looked inside it and found tons of pills. Like a worrying amount. I had no idea what they were for, and I still don't, but it freaked me out a little. My dad also always had kind of questionable friends, so I already didn't love the idea of living with one of them. I was probably way too paranoid and way too obsessed with horror stuff at the time, but I even remember hiding a kitchen knife under my mattress in case he ever came into my room while my dad wasn't home. At the time, it felt more like a comical and ridiculous gesture than a real self-defense weapon, since John had never given me any real reason to be afraid of him. But for some reason, that knife reassured me. Even my dad didn't really like leaving me alone with him. Not because John had ever done anything weird to me, but my dad used to say he was a little weird. Still, he needed the money, and John was his friend after all, so he stayed with us for around 2 months. The first month was normal. Nothing bad happened. John paid his part of the rent, and sometimes even bought groceries for us. Eventually, I got used to him being there. But during the second month, things started getting weird. I didn't know it at the time, but John had stopped taking his medication. My dad and I have a cat, and John started making disturbing comments about it. He'd say weird things about how my dad acted around the cat, implying disgusting stuff that wasn't true at all. At first, it just sounded bizarre more than dangerous. Like I said, he had always been kind of odd, but over time the comments got more intense and more detached from reality. Eventually, my dad started making sure John was either out of the house or in his room whenever I came over. Then one day, I got to my dad's house and noticed John wasn't there. Like usual, I asked where he was. That's when my dad told me he wasn't living with us anymore. Then he explained what happened. Apparently, John had been acting seriously unstable for the last few weeks. My dad told me about things John had been saying and doing when I wasn't there. Things he never told me, not to alarm me, and about how, a few days before I visited, they got into a huge argument. During it, John suddenly accused my dad of sexually abusing our cat, which, obviously, never happened. My dad told him to get out, but instead John completely lost it. He started yelling about how my dad had apparently abused me too, how he knew what was going on, and a bunch of other insane stuff. The argument kept getting louder and more aggressive until it eventually turned physical. I'm going to skip some details, but my dad finally managed to force him outside and called the police when he refused to leave. When the cops showed up and saw the state he was in, they arrested him and took him away. After that, we never really heard from John again. But for weeks after it happened, I was terrified every time I went to my dad's house. I kept imagining John showing up while I was home alone, angry at my dad, completely unstable. Every weird noise in the house freaked me out, but he never came back. Eventually, life moved on, and we kind of stopped thinking about it. His mom came one day to collect his stuff, and after that, he completely disappeared from our lives. Until around 3 months later. One night, my dad sent me a news article. John was on the front page, and the content made my stomach drop. Like I said before, John had stopped taking his medication, and apparently, 3 months after getting kicked out of our house, he ended up going into some kind of psychotic episode. According to the article, he walked into an apartment building carrying a hammer. He smashed windows, destroyed parts of the building, and eventually set it on fire. A woman trapped inside her apartment died in the flames. And he violently attacked another person in the building with a hammer before police finally arrested him. The creepiest part was that nobody in the building even knew him. He had absolutely no connection to any of the victims. They were complete strangers. I'm pretty sure he's locked up now. But even years later, my dad and I still think about it sometimes. What would have happened if he had stayed with us? It's crazy to think we lived with a man accused of first-degree murder months before he snapped. I, 29F, had a very strange encounter with an older man back in college. Like many college students, I was struggling for money. I lived in an area most would consider wealthy. It was a very popular tourist destination for rich families. As a result of that, I decided it would be a good idea to go onto a sugar baby website to try and earn a passive income. I'd heard horror stories from prior sugar babies and would get cold feet when talking about meeting up with the men online. At one point, I decided to suck it up, as I needed money to pay rent, and made plans to meet up with one of the men. It was nothing extravagant, just a trip a few hours out of town to a popular hot spring. I was still nervous and extremely cautious as the trip approached, and made sure all my friends had my location and all the information about this man in case something were to happen. The night before the trip, he had reached out to confirm the plan and wanted to make sure I felt as comfortable as possible. He asked if I needed him to pick me up and if I wanted my own room at the hotel, just in case I wasn't wanting to stay in a room with him. I told him I'd drive myself, so I'd be able to leave freely at any time, and said I'd like my own room. Driving to meet him, the nerves kept growing. I should have listened to my gut. When I arrived at the hotel, it was anything but what I had expected. It was a tiny, dingy motel with about 10 rooms and looked almost abandoned. I saw the man standing outside talking to who I assume was a worker. They seemed friendly, like old pals. I got out of my car and went to meet the man face to face for the first time. He was nothing like I'd expected. He looked very dirty and tired. He asked if I wanted to take my things to the room, and as he opened the door I saw 2 beds, one of which already had his belongings scattered about. I asked about the separate room, to which he informed me the motel was sold out for the night, so we'd have to share. I should have gotten in my car and left, but I was tired after the long drive and it was getting dark. Sharing a room with a stranger seemed more logical than driving hours home, on roads I wasn't familiar with for miles and miles without cell service, in the dark. After I put my belongings in the room, the man suggested we go to dinner. He said it was just down the road and he would drive. I agreed and got into his truck. I immediately noticed how disgusting it was. There was mud everywhere and all the plastic was caked with a thick layer of, what I assume, was dog slobber and hair. He got on the main road for the town and drove towards the restaurant. My understanding was that it was just down the road. I was incorrect. We drove for about 30 minutes before arriving at the next town over, where the restaurant was actually located. Sitting down to eat, I was filled with dread. I didn't want to be there any longer, but it would definitely be too late to drive home once I got back to my car. I ate quickly and tried to keep the conversation polite and friendly, as this man seemed to be someone I wouldn't want to anger. When we got back to the motel, I was searching for anywhere else to stay in the area, but everything was something I couldn't afford. He then offered to take me to the hot springs and I agreed again, as being in a public area felt the safest. After arriving at the hot spring, he enlightened me as to why he picked that specific location. A girl he used to see worked there and he wanted to make her jealous. After a little while, it seemed that he realized she no longer worked there and wanted to go back to the motel. Back in the room, he began talking about his life, and I started to think that maybe he wasn't as creepy as I had thought. Maybe he's just a lonely old man who wanted some company. I became more relaxed as the conversations went on, until he started talking about his ex-wives. I'm a little fuzzy on the exact details of the conversation, as it became tense and panicked with every sentence he added. What I do remember is that his first wife was murdered and he came home to find her body, and the second one had gone missing and the police believe she was killed and hidden somewhere. I calmly excused myself to the bathroom and started texting any male friend I had asking them to come to me. It was almost 2 a.m. at this point and no one was willing to make the drive. I did have one friend who called me and told me to leave the call running as long as I needed until I could leave. I came out of the bathroom and let the man know I was going to go to sleep. He said it was a good idea since it was so late and headed into the bathroom. He came out after just a few seconds holding an old straight razor. He asked if I would be willing to help him shave his face before bed and made a comment about how nice the razor feels on his neck. I declined and told him I was really tired and would be going to bed. I put my phone on the charger with the call still running, set my alarm for sunrise, and tried my best to pretend to be asleep. For the next few hours, I could hear him walking around the room and rummaging through his belongings. I am certain at one point he was standing at the foot of my bed watching me sleep. As soon as my alarm went off, I got up, ran to the bathroom, and changed. When I came out of the bathroom, he was fully dressed and the front door was wide open. His whole demeanor had changed from the night before. He was angry. I grabbed all of my items and headed towards the door. As I was leaving, he threw some money at me and yelled that I needed to get all of my shit out of the fridge, which was just a half-empty bottle of Gatorade. As I was pulling out of the parking lot, I noticed the surprising lack of vehicles for a place that was supposed to be sold out. When I got home, I went to delete my profile off of the site and saw I had a message from the man. He said he wanted to let me know how nice it was to spend time with me and wanted to come visit me in the near future. When I was 13, I became friends with a girl a year younger than me in my middle school. Because I went to a very small private school, we had a lot of classes that were attended by every student in the middle school, which meant that we had a lot of classes together. This girl had been mean to me in the past. There was an incident where she locked me in a closet while I was hanging out with her sister, but when she approached me to be friends, I took her up on that offer because she was the only person in my school who liked the same bands as I did. I was a hardcore emo kid whose special interest was rock bands. It didn't take much more than a shared interest to get me to like you, at least back then. She quickly became very possessive and clingy, always wanting to talk to me and be right next to me. I didn't have a problem with that at first, but then she started to freak out on me if I didn't reply to her texts immediately or if I even talked to other people. It didn't take her long to start telling me that she would off herself if I didn't talk to her 24/7. I fully believed her because I had confessed my own suicidal thoughts to her and knew firsthand how hard it was to cope with. She also used to tell me that my own self-harm cuts weren't deep enough and that I should do it more, in different places and in different ways. I was severely anorexic at the time. I had a BMI of 11, and I found out later that she got other girls in my class to constantly call me fat, so I would turn to her for comfort. She monopolized all of my time, making frequent self-harm threats when she wanted my attention, so I would have to talk to her constantly. Anytime we weren't at school, she was telling me about her plans to hurt or off herself. I stopped sleeping to talk to her. I stopped talking to anyone else because it was a trigger for her. It didn't take long for it to start taking a toll on me. Eventually, I got so scared of her hurting herself that I turned to my teacher to ask for help. But when I told the teacher what my friend had said and where she was hurting herself, it turned out that my friend didn't have any cuts where she said she did. She claimed that she never said any of those things and showed the teacher our chats with only my messages about my mental health and not any of hers. She must have deleted her own texts. The teacher scolded me for making a false report. She would always tell me that she didn't know what the teacher was talking about and that they never talked to her about it. I believed her because she was my best friend. This continued for months before I got scared enough to tell my parents. My mom called her parents, but she did the same thing to them, making it look like I was the only one talking about suicide/self-harm. I found out later that she had convinced my teachers, classmates, and her parents that I was schizophrenic. I'm not, and delusional. They all believed her. I finished middle school with no friends because they all thought I was crazy. It took me over a year to disconnect from her. The entire time, she was pulling shit like that. I found out from her sister later on that the only reason my friend did that was because I had dated a guy she liked the previous year, and she was holding a grudge about it. She was never suicidal, and she had never hurt herself. She ruined my life for a year and a half because the guy she liked had a crush on me. Luckily, I graduated middle school at the end of that year and switched to public school. My parents found out what happened and blocked her accounts on all of my social media and her number from my phone. This was over 10 years ago now, but I still have lingering issues from it. I can't handle seeing anyone upset because I automatically assume that it means they'll hurt themselves. I'm still too nervous to mention other friends near my current friends in case that upsets them. I get really bad anxiety when I'm away from my phone just in case one of my friends needs me and I'm the only one they can reach. So to the girl who ruined my life, made my mental health significantly worse, and left me with lingering trauma, all because her crush liked me.